Hi, thanks for tuning in today to Front Porch Conversations here at Advent Christian Village. We're at the Harmony Center this morning, and our guest is Betsey Ruehl. Betsey, welcome.
Thank you.
And Betsey is my neighbor, lives half a block away, and it's been nice getting to know you and Gary since you've moved here.
Appreciate that.
And we've been involved in some other things like Riverwood Social Club. So, tell us a little bit about how you learned about the village.
Well, it was a really weird situation. In Vero Beach, I used to sell real estate at one point in time. And when Gary said he wanted to move someplace that was not near hurricanes, we started looking on the West Coast. And since he was more familiar with this area, that's how we came up to Live Oak. We started out looking in Lake City, didn't like what we found. Looked in Live Oak, the town, or city, or borough, or whatever it's called, and weren't quite comfortable there. And then I had looked for 55 and older communities, and this is the only one we found. So that's how we wound up here. We had spent 20 years in Vero Beach in a 55 and older community, so we kind of were familiar with the ramifications of living there, not having kids running all over the place, and being with older people, some a lot older than you, and some just about your age, and some that are a few years younger. So we figured we'd find a fit.
Good. Well, let's back up a minute. And where were you born, and where did you grow up?
I was born and raised in Philadelphia. My parents had 6 kids. I was the second of 6. I was the disciplinarian in the group, the one that was the most focused. And so when my older sister went off to nursing school, I became the one that took care of the other 4. 5 girls, 1 boy.
And you finished school there, and
went to grade school and high school there, and attended a community college right before I started work, because with 6 kids and both parents working, you needed the extra income. And my parents decided that, I got out of high school, I had a week to make my clothes, because that's why I took home ec in high school, and then I had to find a job.
And so did you check all those boxes off?
I did. I went to the bank that was 3 blocks from home and put in an application there and was hired. And because Philadelphia has trolleys and it has buses and it has subways, I was able to get to the downtown office where I started. And then eventually I moved to a branch which happened to be 4 blocks from home, and I could walk.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of your career was in banking, I believe. Is that right?
Yeah, I started out as a credit investigator. And I don't know if any of you recall, but when credit first came into being, this is the 1960s, we had credit bureaus, but we didn't have credit bureau machines, so everything was handwritten. So I was credit investigator, did the job verifications and mortgage verifications and credit verifications and all that. Eventually moved up to the trainer for the newcomers that came in to be trained as assistant managers. So here I am, training people that were going to be my bosses, and eventually became assistant vice president in training and quality control.
What are some of your fond childhood memories?
There were a lot of them. My dad was like a big huggy bear. He was like, he could fix anything that needed fixing, and we seemed to manage to keep him in business that way. So with 6 of us, we roller skated on the streets. I remember going to a roller skating rink for the first and only time, because the first trip around the floor, somebody grabbed me by the shoulder and ripped the sleeve out of my blouse. I went, it's not for me. I'm not the athletic type. So that was one. Christmases were always good. We didn't do anything for Christmas until the night before. I mean, we decorated the house, but the tree didn't go up until everybody went to bed, and the packages got wrapped then. And then everybody woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning, came down the steps, and wreaked havoc in the house.
As only 6 kids could.
As only 6 kids could. We baked cookies starting right after Thanksgiving. A tradition that I've continued, and I'm still trying to find my cookie sisters here, but we did that. Pretty much, we took vacations. Our vacations were 1 week long. My cousins came along with us. You don't have a big family and not need more people. Mm-hmm. So I grew up with a grandfather living with us, then an uncle lived with us, and then an aunt lived with us with her 2 kids. And it was a pretty crowded 3-bedroom house,
I would say.
Mm-hmm. But we had fun.
Betsey, you and Gary got married when?
2004, much to our surprise.
Will you tell us about that?
What I can. The funny thing was, Gary and I met at a bowling center. I used to run a kids league, so I was there on Saturdays from 8 o'clock in the morning to 4 o'clock in the afternoon with 200 kids.
That sounds delightful.
Yeah, and a lot of other good coaches. So they were the coaches, I was the runner. The fellow that had been taking care of that passed away suddenly, aneurysm, and the center asked me if I would take over the league. So I did that, and then they asked me if I could fill in at the front desk periodically if somebody didn't show up to set up the lanes and stuff. And so Gary comes in one night with a group of people, and I was at the front desk. And that's where we met. When he came up and said, "I'm cold, can you turn the fan down?" I should have known. But that's how we met. And his neighbor actually worked as a bartender in the bar in the bowling center. So he got the scoop on me before I got the scoop on him.
Well, okay. And it still worked out.
It did. Surprisingly, it did. We're both very tenacious. I think that's a better word than stubborn. But we're both that too. He has his way of doing things, and I have my way of doing things, and sometimes they clash. But one of us will usually say, "Okay, just do it. Get it done." And that's what we do. And we've done it for 20-some years.
When you got to the village, what surprised you as far as after you moved in?
Well, the funny part of the story was when we picked our house, we had looked at 7 others. And we came back to this one and we went to another one. When we came back to this one, our little dog Brandy decided she wanted to go in the house. So we took her in, ran her around, came back out. She decided she wanted to go in again. So she picked the house. We didn't know anybody. It was right after COVID. It was October of 2020. So the very first person to come knocking on our door was Jay next door, inviting us to come over for some ice cream and saying, "If you need anything, holler at me." So the first thing I asked him for was a potato peeler because I didn't know where mine was. So that became a friendship that's lasted so far. The other thing was the incredible kindness of people. Everybody you saw was, you're just like family.
I would have to agree with you. That's one of the special things that people won't believe it until they see it. Mm-hmm. Unless they've lived somewhere else that was like that. But
well,
there are not many places like this.
When we first, I was obviously a much better neighbor to be welcomed into the community than Gary was, because the ladies invited me to a tea. So we had a little luncheon, and I go home and I tell Gary, I said, "I met this one, I met that one." He goes, "So why wasn't I invited?" I said, "Because the guys don't do that." So it's a girl thing.
Mm-hmm. And, well, I know that Brandy chose your house, but now she takes you all over the community?
Yes, now she takes me for a walk, and we go 3 different routes. Some mornings it's down Wildwood Circle, other mornings it's up Wildwood Drive to Meadowview, and sometimes it's down Meadowview to back around the corner in Live Oak. So, yeah, she takes me for a walk. And we've met many puppies and larger dogs and things like that, and other friends, and that's pretty much how I get my scoops for the newsletter. It's like I'll meet somebody on the street and I'll say, "Did you know this?" And off we go.
And you write an article about Riverwoods every week for the Friendly Neighbor News.
I do, and sometimes that's a challenge. It's always better when we have things going on. You know, like this week we've got the newsletter telling about our upcoming event for St. Patty's Day, and that'll be the same thing next week with a few other things thrown in. I can't wait to hear the feedback on this week, though. It should be funny. I usually try and write something that's informative and something that makes you giggle.
And I remember one of your famous articles was on your education for us all on our neighbors, the buzzards.
Oh, yeah. They're very interesting accompaniments to the morning walks. You hear them, you see them, they squawk at you.
But before long, they'll be heading north, most of them.
That would be very nice.
Mm-hmm. We'll say goodbye to them.
We'll appreciate that. We've seen a couple of red hawks. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you're familiar with what they look like, but my newest neighbor told me yesterday that the red hawk was visiting my garden in front of the house. I went, oh, really? I wonder what he's got now. But every once in a while, we'll find a little hole in the ground and figure somebody's been playing around out there that shouldn't have.
Well, speaking of garden, you and Gary are members of the garden club as well.
Yes.
And what do you like to do there?
Well, last year we did a very large tomato crop. I think we had 37 pounds of tomatoes. I think we had 17 pounds of zucchini and God knows how many peppers. So I've been cooking a lot. And this weekend I finally used the carrots that we just plucked from the garden and made a carrot souffle that went over very well for our dinner guests. So that's part of why we did the garden, because we like to eat.
Well, for those who are watching that may not be familiar with our village club here at the garden club here at the village, we have about 50 raised beds now, I believe it is.
I think that's true.
And they have the guys have. Primarily the guys have built all these and put them in place and filled them, and it's just been a huge addition to the garden having all those. And I think a lot of people who wouldn't want to be gardening on their knees in the ground are happy to have raised beds.
Well, we started out gardening on the knees in the ground and gave that one up this year. So, but somebody who takes it over will probably find sweet potatoes next year, because I understand they run.
They do. But it's also a great place to meet people and enjoy the outdoors. Exactly. And a hard-working group of people for the most part. And
they like to eat, too.
Yes. Oh, the garden club does have good meetings with meals from time to time.
Yes, they do.
I know that you hosted a family reunion here.
I did, in Walker Cottage. I had my older sister from California come in, my brother from New Jersey, my sister from Chesapeake, Virginia, and my other sister from Pennsylvania, and their spouses. So we had a good time. We spent 3 days over there. I probably spent a week cooking before they got here, but you know, we had a really good time.
Betsey, I know we've talked about a couple of the areas where you volunteer, but you volunteer a lot of places on campus. Will you share some of those with us that you haven't mentioned?
Okay, well, I did mention earlier the newsletter. I write the ad I don't write it, I edit the ad for the Village Grocer. I used to do Twice Nice, but they combined all three of the shops there, so Shirley does that now. Gary and I both volunteered at Twice Nice shop, which was a hoot, because people were very surprised to walk in and see a guy sitting at the front desk of what is primarily a ladies' store. There are some guys' things in there and some kids, but and he just loved to harass the people as they came in, and they liked to harass him back. So we gave that up a few weeks ago, decided we were going to try and do some other things and see what else we could get ourselves involved in. We mentioned the Riverwoods social group, so I've been helping out with that. I'm trying to think of what else. Oh, well, my next door neighbor, Katie, had lived there for a very short time when we first moved there. And then when her husband passed, I kind of helped her move into her place, and we keep her occupied and busy all the time. We volunteer at the Village Arts because whenever the performances are here, Gary and I take the ticket to the door. He's very good at taking money and putting it all back together and making sure everything balances out. That's his career as a controller. As I mentioned before, the two of us are pretty in sync when it comes to controlling things, and not always on the same page though. But let's see, what else do we do around here? I'm trying to think. We've done some things on River Birch itself. Ellie Forsty and I put together a little gathering about a year or so ago. When new neighbors come in, we get together and pass along something called the Ugly Mug, and that's a Janet Graney contribution. And it's a great way to get to know your neighbors, and that's pretty much how we've gotten to know them all, if they don't have a dog.
But you do have quite a few dogs on your street.
Yeah, we do.
I was invited by one of your neighbors to one of yours, and the Ugly Mug is a fit title, but it's a fun thing because what happens when you get it?
So the newest neighbor on our street actually gets the Ugly Mug, and then they get to host the next party. So it's Bill's turn next, and then once Bill gets done, he passes it on to the McCleskys, and then they can pass it on to, I think, the La Georges came in before the Massengills, and that should finish our street, unless somebody moves. And then we'll have to start going around the neighborhood.
For those who haven't taken part, right, in planning. Well, if you're watching, watch out.
Yep. You never know what you're going to see coming out of that street. It's fun. It's a good place to be.
It is. We spoke about Gary, but why don't you tell our viewers a little more about Gary?
He was born in what he calls the South. It's South Buffalo. He spent his childhood years there. He moved to Florida in 1964. I moved here in 1984. His background has always been business and finance and controllerships, and he's worked for several different companies, both Fortune 500s and Fortune 100s, and that's what he does. I never could understand why you have to sit down and do books for a household, but he does it every month. Keeps us straight.
Well, good. And he chose to not be here with us today.
Yeah, he's not really a toot your own horn kind of a guy. I guess I do that for both of us. But he's pretty private. He has one son, he's got a grandson and a granddaughter. They're all over the place, so we're not always sure where they're going to be.
And is he missing Buffalo right now?
I don't think so.
I've never known anybody who moved from Buffalo that missed winters.
He always says Buffalo is a good place to be from. And he and his, well, we actually hooked up with one of his childhood buddies last May, and he's over in Naples area, so they're pretty fun. And then that's all they talked about was shoveling snow and ice skating rinks and things like that.
Well, I know that you have somebody that was living in your same community that you enticed to move here.
Actually, that's Bob Maxwell, and Bob was our neighbor down in Vero Beach, came up to visit us, liked the neighborhood and the surroundings, and said, okay, one of these days I'm going to be here too. And Gary and I lived up in the mountains in North Carolina for a while, so this is kind of the best of both worlds for us.
But you're full-time here, right?
Yep.
Now. Where in the mountains did you live?
In Barnardsville, North Carolina, a little community of about 1,000 people up on the side of a hill with the bears and the raccoons and the deer and the turkeys, and an interesting lifestyle, but it was too cold. Yeah, that's where our love of gardening kind of got started, because he built me a garden box. And we started growing all kinds of stuff until the raccoons started eating the corn, and the bears started taking the berries, and we weren't making the crops that we wanted. So it got a little chilly for Gary. He's not really the cold weather guy anymore, so he booked it down to Florida, and we did part-time for a while.
When somebody is thinking about moving here, what advice would you give them?
Join everything. put yourself out there and do something. Find something you love and just go for it.
Betsey, I know one of the other things you're very involved in is a game called Mahjong and Bridge.
Mm-hmm. I learned how to play Mahjong and I learned how to play Bridge when we first moved to Vero Beach. So that was 20-some years ago. When I came up here, I didn't really know anybody that played Mahjong except I had heard through the grapevine that Joe England did. So I taught a few more people how to play, so now we've got at least 2 tables and sometimes going on to 3. And now I'm starting to teach Bridge, which is challenging.
For our viewers, though, that may not be familiar with Mahjong, would you tell us a little bit about its origin? And
it's a Chinese game that used to be played by the elite men. And the way they played it, it's a bunch of tiles with different symbols on them. The American game has numbers and symbols. And you set up things like, if you were playing rummy, you would play a run, like a 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, or you'd have 3 of a kind or 4 of a kind. And they also have things called winds and dragons. And it's a little bit funky as far as the language is concerned, but once you learn it, you're pretty much in for life. One of the ladies that I learned from in Vero Beach has been playing for probably 75 years, and still playing. It's one of the Bridge and chess and Mahjong are 3 of the ways that people keep their brains sharp, and it kind of wards off dementia, I think.
Do you remember?
Yeah, I do.
Tell us about your teaching Bridge. You said it's a little challenging.
I've never taught Bridge before.
Okay.
And when I learned to play Bridge, Gary and I learned at the same time. I learned better than he did because he likes to have all the rules laid out right up front. And so he knows exactly what's expected, and every time he would do something, the teacher would say, "You can't do that." Why not? Well, because it's in the rules. But you didn't tell me the rules, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So I started about 3 weeks ago, and we're still doing the beginning basics lessons, because until you get that down, nothing's going to make any sense. And even sometimes when you do get it down, it doesn't make any sense.
And how many people are required to play Bridge?
It takes 4 people to play. It's 2 sets of partners. And you speak in a language that's kind of, everybody knows what it is, but you don't really come out and say what you have. You'll say, "I have a club," and you may not have clubs, but you're trying to get a communication going with your partner to say, "Bid for me," or "Tell me your best suit."
Okay. I'll think about that one.
Well, if you've ever played pinochle,
No, I haven't.
It's similar to pinochle, where it's a bidding system. Mm-hmm. So you bid, sometimes you make it, sometimes you don't. It's a game, so if you can't have fun, don't play.
You have talked about a lot of your hobbies. What about travels? Do you like to travel?
I used to like to travel. I'm kind of feeling really good about just where we are. And it's like, I'm perfectly happy to stay home. I like to cook. So I've got about 100 cooking recipes and cookbook recipes, and I keep trying them all the time. Come up with a different thing every once in a while. And we used to have potlucks every Thursday when we lived in Vero. So it's like, okay.
You mentioned earlier you're looking for cookie sisters. Mm-hmm. Tell us about what a cookie sister would be.
Well, at Christmas time as a kid, we did chocolate chip cookies and my mom's butter cookie recipe. And we would start right after Thanksgiving, and we would be baking every weekend. And that's pretty much what we did. It's like we'd stick them in the kitchen, and hopefully they would last until Christmas. But when you have 6 kids, and my dad loves sweets, so it went really fast. Last year I cooked a whole bunch of them. I think I still have a few. But some of them are in the freezer. And a lot of them we gave away when we did the cookie exchange for the people that were in what I call living at home, as opposed to shut-ins or closed-ins or whatever.
Right.
Those that can't get out and do.
And there was a lot of participation in that. We had great.
16 or 18 people, I think, either brought cookies, made cookies, or delivered cookies. So, and God knows how many people ate them.
But a lot of people smiled afterwards.
Yes, they did. Got some real nice feedback on that.
Well, Betsey, thank you for sitting down with me today and all you do with our neighborhood association as well. And look forward to seeing you at a meeting later today.
My pleasure.
Thanks, and I hope you'll tune in again soon to Front Porch Conversations.